Hello and welcome to another exciting Blender tutorial. Today we're going to be talking about how to use geometry nodes to make this cool liquid effect. Let's get into it. So often when you're working in geometry nodes, you want to have a curve and you want things to follow that curve. You want them to be looking along the direction of that curve. So I want to break that down for you in a way that's beginner friendly and can really help you begin to understand how geometry nodes thinks about this kind of thing. We're going to start off by deleting everything. So I'm going to hit A to select all and X to delete. And then we're going to create two things. We're going to create a curve, Bezier curve. You can just move this up. I'll grab NZ to get it off the origin. And then we're also going to create a mesh monkey. First thing we're going to do is go into geometry nodes. I'm going to pull up my view here, and I'm going to go over to this bit. And we're going to switch to the geometry node editor. And with my Bezier curve selected, I can click new to create a new geometry nodes object. This will create a new modifier. If you go to the modifiers tab, you can see that we've got a new modifier here. If I was to remove it, you can see geometry nodes disappears from this object. Likewise, you can come to the modifier tab and click add modifier, geometry nodes, and we can select the one that we created earlier, or we can create a new one. And you can see it loads up here. These are listed in this little drop down. When you have the geometry nodes window open, you can rename these to whatever you want. Line test, for example. You can see that name's changed there, so we can swap these out. But bear in mind, you're not changing like which one you're editing. I mean, you are, but you're also swapping out which one is referenced to the object. So the object itself has the same drop down. So if you want to change what geometry nodes is affecting a specific object, you can do it here. But anyways, we'll just keep this set to the default. So first thing we want to do is how would you take the monkey, right, and put it along this curve? So let's conquer that first. We've got the input and the output. So everything that's coming into our geometry nodes is coming in here, and everything that's going out is going out there. So what's coming in? The curve. That's it. And what's going out? Just the curve. So pretty simple so far. Now, we have a couple of nodes that we can use to put things along a curve. So I'm going to go Shift A and go to search. So bring up my search menu and I can have a look for, if I just look for curve, let's say, and we want to put points on the curve, we can see curve 2 points is an option here. So I can drop this down right here and you can see I have this count slider. So I'm going to set this to 10. And so now you can see I've got 10 points that have been generated on the curve. Now they're quite tight. So if I go into edit mode, I can edit this curve and just move it out a little bit so we can see a bit better. Scale these and just kind of create some little bends and rotations in this. All right, so we have 10 points and we can increase that and they're going to be evenly distributed. So again, that's a great reminder. If you want to figure out how to do something in geometry nodes, often you can just go Shift A and hit that search menu and you can find what you're looking for. If you just type in some words, they reference what you're looking for. So that's a good first place to start. But okay, let's turn these points now into the monkey. So we want to take these, we're going to use the instance on points node. So I'm going to type in instance and here it is. And this will be the node you always use whenever you're trying to put something in place of points. Let's pick our instance. We need to specify the monkey. So I can actually just go up here to Suzanne and drag her in. And now we've got the object info node. You can also just create this node. Go object info, and then you get a little drop down here. You can pick whatever you want, or you've got this color picker. We can just color pick. And so we'll just go with this. I'll take the geometry and I'll plug it into instance. And now we've got 10 Suzannes and they're spread out along the curve. You see, as I move this curve around, I get more of them. As we increase the count, we get more of them that way. So very cool. But they're not looking in the direction of the curve. And this is really what you often want. You pretty much always want this. You always want things to be facing along a curve. Usually you're trying to animate something to move along a curve as well. And this is where you can see we have some issues. Things are breaking down a little bit. There's no real way to move stuff. There's no position information here. If I come over here and add a set position node and try and offset these, they're all going to move and they're not going to move along the curve and they're not going to face in the direction of the curve. So there's a lot of things that are missing that we still need to build out. So how would you do that? Let's start with the rotation bit. How do you get something to look in the direction that the curve is flowing in? This is probably one of the most common things you'll need to do. So naturally, in our instance on points, we have this option here to rotate our instances. So we're going to be using this to control that. So I'm going to create a new node, and this is called, it's called align rotation to vector. We've got a lot of inputs and we got one output. So I'm going to take this output, rotation, and I'll plug it in here. Nothing's happening yet because we really haven't done anything. And what we need to do is assign a vector. So what is that? I mean, we're hitting some terminology now. Okay, so I've got this arrow here, and to understand what a vector is, you need to understand this, okay? 2 points. I've got a point here, which is at the origin of my world, so it's at 0, 0, 0, right? I've got another point here, which is moved along the y by 1, right? So 1 unit forward. These 2 points define a vector in Blender, okay? But what's really important to know is that Blender kind of assumes that every vector starting point is 0, 0, 0. So the only numbers that define the vector are the sort of the final one, like where does that arrow end up? And in this case, it's 0, 1, 0. So if I was to enter into the vector node 0, 1, 0, Blender would basically be visualizing this, right? And if I was using this as a direction and saying, hey, I want you to rotate or orient yourself along this direction, it would use these numbers to orient along an arrow like this. So when you're, asked, a vector like this, basically, let's have a look at this. So 0, 0, 1, let's look at what that would be. So if I come here and I enter 0, 0, 1, so this is what 0, 0, 1 looks like. Okay, so pointing straight up. Our original Bezier curve, when I go back into it, you can see we have 2 control points, and these control points have these handles, which we can move around. And these handles are called tangents. And the tangent of a curve, if you haven't done calculus, the tangent of a curve is basically like a line, a straight line that intersects the curve, right, at that point, right? And you think about it as like the, well, these handles is a great way to think about it. It's sort of like, which way is this thing curving? Like, what's the slope of the curve at this point? So this is called a tangent. And you can see we've got tangent as an output here from our curves to point node. So what this does is it takes the curve at the group input, it receives it, and then it creates the points like we've asked it to, but it also outputs some information for each point that it creates. So at every point, all 12 of these points, it creates a tangent, a normal, and a rotation. So the tangent is what is the basically angle, like what is the direction the curve is going. So let's take that. We'll take the tangent and we'll plug it into the vector. Now you can see they are rotating. Now, not quite rotating the way we want, and that has to do with this, the X, Y, and Z. So you got to define what's the forward vector. So what is the forward direction of this object? Well, if we look at Suzanne down here, she is looking right here along, so make sure we haven't rotated it at all. Yep, no, we haven't. So her forward direction is actually along this Y-axis right here. So if we switch the align to Y, you can see she will be facing correctly. She'll be looking along the Y as she makes her journey across this spline. If I go into edit mode, I can hit E to extrude after selecting one of these points, and I can scale these, move them around. You can see that we can end up with more and more of these, and they continue to follow the direction of these tangents, and they can go in any way we want, which is really cool. So that is how you can get objects to align along a curve if you're using geometry nodes and instancing, right? But next problem, how do you get them to move? How would you get these guys to travel along the curve? That's going to require something a little bit different. As you can see, the instance on points node doesn't give us any kind of position option, right? Now, we could come over here and put set position, and we could try and move them that way. But again, they're all going to just move off of the curve. We want them to change their position based on the position of the curve at every point in between all these curves and handles. And we're going to need another node to get that kind of information. So let's grab the sample curve node. Now, the sample curve node gives us what we're looking for. There's a couple of inputs. It's asking for the curves that you want to be sampling. It gives you a value, a vector, and a curve index. And we'll talk about what's relevant to us in a moment. We also have these 2 options, factor and length. Now let's bring this in so we can have a look at it. I'm going to take my group input all the way back here, because remember, this is a curve that's coming in because we put this geometry node system onto a curve object. So this is a curve right here, our original Bezier curve. I'm going to plug that into curves. And now I'm going to be able to access some information here, the normal, tangent, position, and value. So what we're after is the position, okay? And we want to get the position of the curve along the curve at different points along the curve. And the factor is a way of sampling the curve. So 0 represents the beginning of the curve, and 1 represents the end of the curve. You could switch this to length, and this will be the actual length of the curve, where 0 is the beginning of the curve. And then you can just drag up in meters to get to the total length of the curve. That's just a different way of accessing the beginning or the end of the curve. But we're just going to stick with factor because 0 and 1 will be consistent no matter how long this thing goes, and it gives us a bit of a simpler context to talk about. What we want to do is set this factor, and we want to grab the position, and we want to then set the position of these points based on this. So let's go ahead and grab a set position node, and this is going to feel a little counterintuitive at first, but stick with me. We need to set the position of our points. So if I take the position of the sample curve and I plug it here into the position, you see what happens is they're all going to move to the same spot. Now, if I change the factor, you can see now they're all moving along the curve, which is what we want. But we've lost that really nice distribution across the curve that we were getting from the points to the curve to points node. So this isn't great. Also, you can see that they're not necessarily orienting correctly. They're all orienting in different ways. In fact, they're still oriented, right, based on this original setup. So they're being placed like this, rotated along the curve, and then they're all being moved off of this to wherever the position is coming from the factor. And so that's why they have these different rotations. So what we need to do is we need to set the position for each one at a different point. So when you need to do something like this in geometry nodes, it can be at first really difficult to try and wrap your head around how to do it. But in essence, it's always going to be the same process. So if you can learn this, you'll be able to apply this to all kinds of different scenarios. That's why it's really valuable. I open up the spreadsheet view, which is right here. I'll just split my view and grab this. You can see that each of these different points is an instance, and there's 12 of them, right? And they each have this ID, right? Or this index. So we can use that to drive all kinds of stuff when we want to evenly distribute something across a different space, or we want to have a different result from like something like sample curve, where we want to get a different value, a different position for each one that's unique. So they're not all stacked up on the same spot. Now we can do that in a lot of ways. We could take the factor and we could make it random, right? We can say random, touch in random value, and we've got 0 to 1 is our minimum and a maximum, and it's just going to create a bunch of random numbers. And basically this is positioning these guys along the curve at random points using the factor. Now, you might think, okay, well, hang on, we've just gone back to where we were before. Like, what is this doing for us? I'm just going to get rid of that so we can see all this. Because this set position node, like if we mute this right now, they're just nicely distributed. But all we've done is we've randomly moved them. We still can't move them along the spline itself. Well, if you remember, the factor, right, is a factor of 0 to 1. And what we can do here is we can actually add to this value. So think about this. It's going to create a random number. You see this dotted line? That means that it's going to loop through every point when it does this particular action. So it's going to create a different random number for each point, for each little monkey. And that's what's driving the factor right now. But we could then uniformly move them all. So we could say, let's add a value to the factor. Let's go math, grab the math node, and I'll set this to 0. And so we're not doing anything to it. But if I slowly add to each of these or subtract, you can see that what's happening is they're all sliding along the curve, right? And that's because it's, in essence, we're doing this. We're moving between 0 and 1. But the value is a little bit different for each individual one. So that's why we are adding to see them move. And also why when we go past 1, they're all stationary, because they've reached 1. They've reached the end of the factor. And when you go to 0, below 0, they're back at the beginning, right? Now, we don't want to have a random value. We actually want to have a set value for each one of these guys. So let's do something that's going to give us that. We can use the ID or the index to get a number for each individual point, which is sequential. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So I could come here, right? And I could say, all right, let's take the ID or the index and let's plug the index into the factor, right? Now they're all going to end up over here, and one of them is going to end up over here. That's because the index starts at 0, which is here, and the next index is 1, right? Which we're doing this straight into the factor. It's only 0 to 1. So now number 1, so the second point is over here. 2 is past 1, so it's going to be over here, along with all the subsequent points. They're all going to be there. So what we can do is we could scale this. We could say multiply, and let's bring this value down by 0.1. Now I can plug that into a factor. Now you can see we're starting to get a better distribution. Things move along, which is looking cool. But this kind of breaks down if we have more. So as we add more to it, you can see they're all kind of piling up over here. And that can be a bit of a pain to constantly have to adjust this. So what we can do is we can take the count, the total number of points that we have, right? And let's say, let's make that total number of points the maximum of our factor. So let's make that equal to 1. And then let's take 0 and make it 0, and then scale those values in between them. So they always fit within a range of 0 to 1. Now, to do that, you're going to want to use the map range node. So let's pull that up. Let's grab map range. I'll drop this here, and we'll take the index as our value. So this takes a value in our case, our index, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And it says from minimum from maximum. So the minimum is 0 and the maximum is whatever the count is. So what's the highest number that we're going to go to for this, right? So it's 12. So what we can do to make this a little easier is we can come out here and we can create a value node, and we can have the number 12 there, and we can use this number to drive both of these. So we're going to say from max is now 12. So 0 to 12 is going to become 0 to 1, right? So that picture a timeline, if you have 0 and 12, it's going to translate those numbers and scale those numbers so that they become 0 to 1. So we've scaled these values now to a range that's 0 to 1. So now I can plug this into the factor. Now these guys are going to be evenly distributed across the curve from the 0 point to the 1 point. And they're going to be consistent as I increase the value. So as I add more and more and more, they're going to stack up, right? And they're going to continue to be evenly spaced, which is what we wanted. So I'll keep this at 12. Now we can use the same idea to move them. But after the map range, we want to just add a flat value to all of them to move them along the factor, to get a different sample factor on the curve, to get a different position, right? So I'll grab the math node and I'll drop this here. We'll keep it at add, set it to 0. And then if you just hold down shift to make a small incremental change, you can see that we get these guys moving as we want. There's one thing that isn't changing with them as I drag through this, and that is the rotation. You can see that they're maintaining the rotation that they started with, and we want them to actually rotate with the curve. So let's go back to our align rotation vector information here. Now we're using the tangent of the original curve, which isn't changing at all. But we want to be getting a different tangent now for every location along the curve that the point is at. Thankfully, the sample curve has a tangent output. So not only can we use the position to set the position, we also use the tangent to grab a unique tangent for that specific moment. So now as I add to this value, you can see that they are rotating along the curve. So now we have a way to cause these guys to animate along the curve and keep oriented correctly. I want to create like this kind of water slime effect, right? That we can move around and have animate. So I want to create like a tail, right? Where it tapers off as it goes. Create a new map range for it. So I'll duplicate that and I'll grab the index and I'll plug it into the value. And instead of 0, I never want it to be like fully gone. I'm going to take, let's see. Oh, I need the count as well. It's important. So I'm going to grab the count as the from max. And instead of 2 min of 0, I'm going to make this like 0.3 or something, right? So it's going to take 0 to 12 and rescale those values to 0.3 to 1. There we go. Now it's the size just based on what their index number is. So I'm going to take my count up. I'm going to really fill this out. Let's add a bunch of these guys, like 200, something like that. And now you can see we're getting this really cool streak effect, which is kind of cool in itself. Okay, now let's take this and let's turn it into kind of like a glob thing. So I'm going to come right over here. And the first thing I want to do is I'm going to grab, let's see, the mesh to volume node. This will take this mesh and convert it into a sort of like a misty volume. Now I want to turn that volume back into a mesh. We're like remeshing it basically with this trick. So we're going to go volume to mesh. There it is, volume to mesh. We'll drop that there. And now we've got our volume to mesh. I'm going to turn down the voxel amount just so the resolution is not too high. And you can see it's not quite working. It's like we're still getting each individual piece. And that's because it's viewing these as instances, and it needs to view them each as a unique piece of geometry to like join it all up. So we need to use the realize instances node. So we'll put that there, and now it thinks of it all as one big piece. All right, now I want it to be a smooth object, so I'm going to set smooth. So instead of right-clicking and set shade smooth, you have to do that within geometry nodes for this to work. So I'm going to grab set smooth, set shade smooth, and drop it there. Now it's going to think of this as a smooth object. So I'm going to go here now to my source geo, this little Suzanne here, and I'm just going to make it a little bit less Suzanne-y. And I'm just going to grab a point down here at the bottom of her chin, and I'm going to turn on proportional editing and grab Z and then just zoom up, and I'm just going to go up like this. Cool. All right, now I'm going to just shape this a little bit. I'm going to go into edit mode and just change my control points just so there's a bit more of an interesting dynamic curve. I'm going to switch to rendered view, and I'm going to turn off scene world. I'm going to turn opacity up. This will use one of the built-in HDRIs. Just have a look at a couple of these options. And then I also want to create a material. So I'll come here to the material tab to create a material, but we'll need to assign it within geometry nodes. So we'll come over here and I'll give it like a, I don't know, maybe like a red color. And I will turn my subsurface scattering all the way up. And then I'll go set material. And I'll set this right at the end. There we go. Then I also want to go to my renders tab and make sure I turn on ray tracing. And then let's go back down to the material tab and let's drop that roughness to make it a bit slimier. Go back to my camera. I'm going to turn on depth of field and I'll just pick one of these, my focal distance. Turn up my f-stop a little bit, set myself a focal distance. Thanks so much for watching. Hope you found that really helpful and that you really understand better how to align things to a curve when using geometry nodes and some of the cool tricks you can use to play with that. So thanks so much. Please consider joining the Patreon. You can find all the uncut tutorials there, along with YouTube, where if you join, you can get access to those on the community page. Check them out. They each run for like an hour or 2 hours sometimes. A lot of extra stuff that I cut out to make these tutorials. So if you like extra content, jump in over there. Thanks so much for watching. I will catch you in the next tutorial. Until then, have a great week. See ya.